Welcome, welcome, welcome into the room with a special agenda. To sorry guys, again doing technical stuff. All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome into the room with a special agenda. And today we are discussing something that on screen, how the spelling is exactly what it's meant to be. It seems as I will be using the term accepting. No, what I mean is exclusion. Oftentimes we are day to day dealing with life, mental stresses, situations, family, work, and all of those things included, we are expected to thrive, our loved ones and ourselves, whatever our situation may be. And life is much more stressful than we are realistically accepting of. Oftentimes we're expected to wear a cape, particularly if you're a parent. But truthfully, we are not realistic in what is required of us in our day to day life and of our loved ones. We want things to go the way that society tells us things should go, television tells us things should go. We all want a storybook life without realizing that what we're requesting is unrealistic. We are expected to accept without exclusion things that aren't possible humanly. Oftentimes, we don't acknowledge the fact that what we want may not happen. And the pressure that we put on ourselves to be honest with ourselves about that so that we can make the necessary adjustments oftentimes are extreme. And the stress it puts on your family, on your loved ones, and your work situation. Um, we don't accept the truth. In all situations, everything isn't going to go the same for everyone. I was talking to someone that was really close to me recently, and they were telling me all the things that were going on with someone that they love and deal with. And without understanding that what they were requesting was that that person be someone else. Now, I'll say that again for the people in the back. They were making all these requests of this individual without making any adjustments of understanding that everything that they were asking was this person be someone else. If you don't like anything that someone does and you don't like their personality, their, their personal habits, true, some of those things may be things that may be able to be adjusted. And some things will never be able to be adjusted. Depends on who they are and why they are the way they are. Oftentimes, when we have people that we love, maybe our children, grandchildren, mates, we tend to neglect to process mentally that they are who they are. And some of those things are character traits. And some of those things are mental issues or upbringing or just a part of who they are innately. But if you are so unhappy with that person's behavior, are you willing to make the time to sit down and say to yourself, okay, this requires deep prayer and thought and acknowledgement that this person may not be able to be who you think they should be? And is it fair to ask that much of someone? Can you change everything about yourself? Now the question begs a different, is that who you want? And if it's their children, that's a much bigger discussion. And part of that discussion would be, are we not being honest with ourselves with who they are and their actual capabilities? Oftentimes we are making these huge requests of a situation that cannot change in the way that we want because it isn't what we want. So we just keep pushing as if it's a reflection of us. And oftentimes that's really what it is. When you're asking someone else to change, particularly if it's not a child and it is an adult, and these are just little ticks and it's not something that will cause the world to blow up, you're asking them to be someone else because you feel it's a reflection of you. Somehow, this personally has something to do with who you are, your day to day life, your personal greatness, rather than accepting that those things that you find so agitating are just small imperfections that are part of human nature, that we all have something possibly different, but without realizing that maybe the person that needs to make adjustments might be us. Because what we're asking isn't really possible. For a while, I did not accept, without realizing that as much work as I was doing for my daughter, and as we were doing as a couple, my husband and I, to help her to get where she needed to be academically and trying to get there socially, not accepting that there were certain things that were not going to change. She was not going to be a different person, and it did not mean that she was not going to be wonderful and kind and sweet and have possibilities. But we were pushing so hard that it was unfathomable in our mind that she would not achieve certain things without accepting that there were certain things that she did not need to do because of some of her limitations. Though she was great and academically capable, there will be certain job possibilities that she should not be put in that position because she would not be able to handle it in the manner that other people would, and it would be overwhelming to her. And nothing about what we did was going to change that. And because of that attitude, that thought process, that not being accepting of her and what she was and who she was, it was so hard as a parent to let go of those dreams that we just kept pushing without accepting, with an E, that part of what we were dreaming about was going to be excluding, because this was accept in this situation. Accepting with an A as a parent was was difficult, and accepting with an E was even more difficult. Oftentimes, as loved ones, we have the hardest time accepting that when people do things or make mistakes, or the things that they are dealing with are not projections against us. They are not intentionally, oftentimes, trying to make our life hard or not cooperate. Many times there are many diagnoses and many mental health issues that people don't get. And we often, even when they get the diagnosis and even when we get the information that lets us know what their limitations are going to be and what things are going to happen, we take it to the degree that we take these people apart mentally. If you know that they suffer from bipolar, or they're schizophrenic, or they suffer from manic depression, instead of accepting it for what it is, we want to put it in the light of accept in their situation. Somehow it's different for them because we are personally involved. So, because we're personally involved, we have taken it as a personal agenda to decide that everything that they do is attack against us, rather than realizing that they are struggling too. And all they need is our love and support and understanding. Does that mean that you don't correct people? Absolutely not. Everything you do needs to be done in love, even when it's difficult. Sometimes the person we need to give a time out is ourselves because we are having a hard time. Does that mean that they are intentionally attacking us and we should just overlook it? No. There will be behaviors that are definitely unacceptable, but we also have to consider that even though they're having a hard time and we are correcting them, we have to decide that we don't treat them like we disapprove of them as a person, that we don't care about them as an individual, as that their shortcomings are things that are unacceptable because we wanted to improve. Oftentimes we want, I've heard people make the statement with their children who have issues, I'm not getting a break, and they don't understand and they're not giving me a break. They can't understand because it's cognitive issues. Many times people don't recognize that those cognitive issues are real, and that taking that person apart and berating them and going on and having this deep conversation that you think you're having, they're not processing any of it. And what they do internalize is, particularly when it's autism or other mental health issues that are cognitive, they don't get that. You're going on an hour and a half rant with them about their toys on the floor and why they shouldn't be there and this, that, and the other. Depends on where they are on the spectrum. They're not going to hear all of that. They're not going to process what you're trying to help them arrive at. So, except in those situations, will it be productive for you to do all of that? What you can do is help them learn why they should pick their toys up so that they can find them, enjoy them, they won't get lost, they won't get hurt. But to have a conversation with them along the lines of helping them to understand where you stand and that they won't, you're not going anywhere with that. And that it's not their intention to be narcissistic, because that's not what that is. That's not what that is. It's not intentional. And so oftentimes there are other issues that people have. ADHD, which causes people to have problems with organization, uh, getting tasks done in a timely manner, keeping things straightened out and clean. It will be something that they will struggle with, but it's not something that they're doing to intentionally antagonize you, make you upset, and they'll be extremely forgetful. Oh, extremely forgetful. They won't remember to lock doors, or they'll lock stuff up. Uh, and those things, and they may be extremely intelligent, but those things aren't things that they're doing intentionally. And many times it's undiagnosed, but you'll see those things continue to manifest itself. Because, because who would continue to lose their keys on purpose? They're not doing it on purpose. I remember having a conversation with a loved one about someone who had Alzheimer's and dementia. And I remember them saying that they would go to pick this person up and they couldn't find their keys or they couldn't find their purse. And they were so angry about it and aggravated. They don't know how much my time they're wasting. I'm like, they didn't want to lose their purse or keys either. It's not their intention to be difficult. So put yourself in that position and understand that why would it be beneficial for them to do anything that they're not? They're losing as much time as you, and they feel bad, even if they don't say anything to you. Now, many times, some people depends on what else is going on with them. They may not verbally say to you that they feel bad about it, and they feel bad about wasting your time, because at that moment they're really caught up in the fact that they can't find their keys or what other possession of their phone or whatever possession they have lost, which they continually do. It is not intentional, but it won't help to take them apart about it. You can help someone develop tools to improve, but you cannot help them by helping them destroy themselves, because they do it enough mentally without you saying anything. There are many people around them who constantly judge their shortcomings without understanding what it is. So they may be judged as inept, incompetent, someone who is not capable, or because of their being disorganized, they're not efficient. So they have to find different tricks and tools to find out how to be efficient. And in those situations, that is that accept, not accept, accept. In those particular situations, this is what it will be. But taking the time to talk to loved ones about and finding out how they feel, because those are the people that generally end up with such extreme depression over constantly being berated and taken apart by people who do not understand that, except in their particular situation, no matter how intelligent they are, it is not their intent to make your life, while they're making their own life, difficult. Those are the ones who end up on the list of people who deal with suicidal thoughts and occasionally have been known to act on them. Those are the ones who act like they're fine, they're okay. Well, on a day to day basis, they're falling apart, because when you have some of those issues, life is really difficult and stressful because there's such disorder, unintentional disorder, but disorder nonetheless. So, on that note, we must consider how important it is that we show our loved ones that they are important to us, in spite of the fact that they have these shortcomings. What does that mean for us when it comes to making a day to day life plan, when dealing with loved ones? How do you help them and accept yourself? What changes you need to personally make? Once you excited that you realize that you can't change them, because they can't even change them. They're trying, but there are certain things that they just won't be able to change. You'll never make a square tile roll. You won't. It's not meant to. So once we realize that we have to accept that they can't change no matter what they do, what changes can we make mentally ourselves? What discussions do we need to have with that person, with other loved ones, too, to help them, so it doesn't constantly be a barrage of individuals who feel like they're helping by constantly giving negative criticism. They think it's um, positive critiquing, but if it's everything that's what's wrong with them with no solutions, or constant correction, it gets to be overwhelming for them. And oftentimes, in those situations, it manifests itself in the form of anger. And anger is the backside of hurt. Anytime you see someone get angry, more than 90% of the time, and I dare to say 99.9% of the time, their feelings have been hurt. They have felt insulted and frustrated by a circumstance because they're overwhelmed with what's been said, or they felt something's been done to them. Something's been directed at them that's negative, and they don't have an automatic solution. And in that moment, they feel overwhelmed. And so you get that outburst, whether it be physical or um, emotional. With adults, it's in the form of yelling. In children, there'll be a meltdown of some sort. They'll be crying, and they may throw their toys, or they may fall on the floor. Adults don't generally do that to that degree, unless they are somewhere on the spectrum or have anger management issues in which they lack the skill set to have that conversation where they automatically know the words to use, because everybody doesn't have the thought process in that moment of what they need to say and who they need to say it to in order for this situation to be resolved, and the understanding of whether or not that situation can be resolved in the way they wish they want it to, or will they be able to adapt and adjust to the manner in which it has to be handled, because everything can't be handled in the way that we want when we want it that way. It may not work out that way. But for adults that cannot handle it, then that's how it manifests itself. Um, when it is children that are on the spectrum or adults that are on the spectrum, you will see more of those behaviors of when they're overwhelmed physically. They may do things like shouting. It may even manifest itself in the form of a tick. Oftentimes, when you see children that are autistic and they um, start to have a meltdown, as they say, there are certain things or even sensory issues that they don't know how to make it clear to you what's happening as to what is causing them to be upset. I didn't, once we were having this discussion on live, and I couldn't remember the word fluorescent. I know, chalk it up to getting older. Um, and one of the things I did not know initially with my daughter when we found out that she was autistic was that fluorescent lights triggered them because they make a humming sound. We don't ordinarily hear it, but when it's many of them, when they would go into we would go in department stores and stuff. I couldn't understand what was happening. I remember once we were at a Bible assembly, and I didn't get to hear any of it. We were in the hall with me sitting on the floor with her on my lap. And occasionally she would roll away from me, or like stretch all the way out. But she was having a hard time, and it was because of the facility that we were at had fluorescent lights, and it was a lot for her. I did not know that sirens and those things caused all of that. I had no idea that those were contributing factors in what was happening, but because she lacked the ability at that time to speak to me and say, "This is a problem for me," and she was so young, also, um, she couldn't tell me that it was bothering her. Some things depends on where they are and their personal sensory issues. It can be so severe that it is painful to them. I remember my son, who is on the spectrum, but he is much, much higher functioning and has the ability to inform you what's going on, and always does, to the degree that I have to tell him, "Please stop sharing. You do not need to tell me that much. If you have a hole somewhere, just tell me where it is. That it's torn. You don't need to give me all the other details." But he would complain because he had a tag in his clothing. And I had to learn to get clothes that did not have a tag, either cut it out or we either would cut it out or make sure that we had clothes that had print in them, not the tag, because even that, the print could not be too raised in the clothing. We did not know that that was an issue for him. He would rip a hole in the clothes trying to get the tag out. The same thing with haircuts. For him, for a very long time, his sensory was to get his hair cut, he would cry like he was in physical pain. Now, anybody that knows me well knows that my husband at one point was a barber, and he still cuts his hair now. So he's never had to go to a barber shop. And his dad was trying to be as gentle as he could, but it was increasingly difficult for him to sit still as the haircut went on because to him it was painful. And you're like, painful? It wasn't even him lining him up. It was him literally just cutting his hair with clippers. For him, that was too much, and the hum of the clippers was too much also. Just as of recent, he got to the point where he could sit through it. He still says it causes him great discomfort. Bits of hair on his neck. He would be having the most horrible time, it seemed, because of that little situation. For him, that was awful. But understanding that we could not change that and having to learn how to modify those behaviors so it was a doable situation where he wasn't overwhelmed. We learned that we needed to cut his hair wet, not dry because it was pulling on his hair, and that was what was hurting him. Oftentimes, we forget how important it is that to make the adjustments that we need made for someone else that we love and care about, like we would want them to do for us. We can't always expect that people who aren't able to cognitively make changes for us because we want it, because it's a lot, because it's difficult. It's a lot for them too. But unfortunately, they don't have the skill set, the ability, circumstances to change what they would love to change. They would love to be in our position to with them. They recognize when we sit in judgment. They recognize when we're disappointed or we're angry. And many of them do internalize it. So oftentimes what we need to do is understand that there will be adjustments that need to be made, but oftentimes the adjustment needs to be made within us. We need to accept that what we are requesting might be the exception. And that is what it will be. That will have to change because the circumstance won't. Sometimes you cannot move a mountain, but you better learn how to go around it. Make the improvements so that they will feel loved, so that you will feel loved. Your relationships will improve as you learn to recognize the changes that can be made and what those possibilities truly are. Over time, as I learned to give my daughter the words that she needed, ask her the questions that she could answer. I started to ask her, I started to notice that with during this pandemic, she was overwhelmed a lot. And she started to say the things to me that was, I started to understand and to see what the problem was for her. Because we had been sick a number of times due to this, I did not feel comfortable putting her in anything else. And some of the programs took a long time, and I wasn't certain how this was all going to work out. And it wasn't things that she was really interested in. But she started to let me know why she was so anxious. She says, Mom, I'm lonely. Because I said, Rayla, are you lonely? Are you bored? She says, I am lonely. I am bored. But how it was manifesting herself was her perseverating. Perseveration, for those who do not know, perseveration is when they say something over and over or do something over and over. Because it's kind of like if you miss your turn on the highway and it's a little tiny turn and traffic is high and you can't get over in that lane. So you have to get off, go back around, get back on, but you have to get on far enough back so that you could try to get back to that turn again. But each time, if you miss it, you have to do the same thing again. You have to get off, drive down, find another entrance onto the highway, go back around, try to get back to far back enough onto the highway where you cannot miss that exit again. And you have to pay close attention and try to make sure you're in the right lane to do that. And for them, that's a similar situation. When they don't have the words to use, they will say over and over what they know to say about what's happening. So they'll ask all these questions. I want to do this. I want to do this. Can I take this? Can I do this? Because they're requesting something. And you have to find out not only what they're requesting, but why they're requesting it. Oftentimes, we miss that with them. And we can miss that when it's not anyone that's on the spectrum, too, with our mates, with our friends. People will tell you what you need to know, but if you don't know why they're saying it and you don't ask why they're saying it, you will just take it as information that's just information that they're giving. Rarely are people giving you information for no reason. Ask more questions. Questions aren't bad. Questions are necessary. But for people who are on the spectrum, what and where and why questions will always be the hardest. If you ask them why they did something, they will just repeat what they did. They cannot break down the specifics emotionally of what caused them to do this particular thing. It depends on where they're on the spectrum. But most of the time, more than 90% of the time, it's almost impossible to get a why out of them. You can possibly get where, but why is very difficult. And sometimes when chronological issues, unless they are echolalic, then they will tell you what each person said when they said it. They can recite a conversation like a record player, but the logistics of the conversation, the breakdown, they can't. It gets hard. But once I started to give her the words that she needed, we started to have a more clear conversation. And I started to see her for what she was personally going through. And then I started to understand why I should not be overwhelmed myself with her having these conversations because all she was trying to do was get clear to me that she was overwhelmed and she was tired of not having the activities that she'd had. And she really would like for me to find something for her to do where she had some form of acceptable association and some activity where she wasn't confined. And when you are really their only true friends, it is hard. Oftentimes they can make friends, but it's just not easy in a world that is not understanding of what they're going through and helping them to process. And how does that translate to those who they're not on the spectrum? It is important that we take the time to show our loved ones that we love them by taking the time to have a clear conversation without accusation, without taking someone apart, because oftentimes we're doing it without realizing it. If we think that a conversation is full of constant berating without realizing that that's what we're doing, if all you're doing is criticizing everything that person does and why you didn't do this and why you didn't do that, if we're not careful, we will take them apart and make it impossible for them to be put back together. We will be a contributing person in their mental unwellness. We will. And it's important that we realize that if we know that a situation is not someone that we have to care for, or we're not their caregiver, and it's clear that this person has some personal issues that they may need to be treated for, it may be undiagnosed, it is most healthy for those involved to understand that it is perfectly acceptable to decide that you cannot entertain their company or in the way in which you once were without understanding that what's happening won't change. And to accept someone back in as a friend if you've kicked them out or whatever, if you're just going to keep doing that to them, if you're just going to keep getting off that highway looking for that exit, it's not going to change. They can't change. So at some point, it becomes emotional abuse to keep telling someone that you care and you're a friend without wanting to make any adjustments yourself and only accepting what you accept, meaning you've excluded the fact that they are who they are. And if you can't accept them and you're going to criticize them forever, and you'd be perfect if this be better if, but all you have is a lot of ifs. You're not accepting the possibility of what great they are, and you're not trying to improve the situation on your personal end of trying to understand, because there has to be some acceptance from you. And when you don't decide to do that, what ends up happening is you're just torturing that person, and nobody deserves that. So, on that note, we have to remember to love our loved ones, show them and let them know every day how much they mean to us, and do what's best for us too. Make make time to have those true discussions. You all love everyone that you can, and be kind because it's a choice. Have a good night.